The last thing anybody wants now is an emergency. But like everything else, they're ready for that too.
Once the crew are on board, if it looks as if they're in danger, they get out and head down this tube, specially insulated against fire, and zigzagging down not to some point out and away from the rocket, but to an escape room exactly where you'd think it shouldn't be. Three and a half minutes after they get the warning in the capsule, the crew could be down here in the blast escape room via that 200-foot escape tube, 40 feet below the base of the rocket. They find themselves in a totally rubber room, walls and floors, and they head for safety through a 6-inch steel door. Once they're behind that door, it doesn't matter what comes down this tube behind them.
Now, Andy, did you hear about this one? Tell me, are you locked in the pond? Andy, are you goofing on Elvis too? Are we losing touch?
On this side of that door, the rarely seen blast escape room itself. It's totally isolated from everything around it by a series of 24 giant springs underneath the floor and shells all round it of steel, concrete and sand. It contains enough food, water and air for 20 people for up to 24 hours, and it's all round the edge. There are these foam rubber shock-absorbing seats, as you can see. The room is built to withstand the simultaneous explosion of every drop of fuel on a Saturn V. And in that event, strapped into your shock-absorbing seat, if your rocket did blow itself to bits 40 feet above your head, all you'd feel would be a mild rumble from somewhere up there. It's really quite small. At its widest point across the base, it's only about 13 feet. Inside, it's even more cramped than it looks from outside, for 3 men, all of whom are about 5'11" each. The lunar module pilot, Buzz Aldrin, lies in that couch there. In the center couch, which has been taken out to let us get in, Michael Collins, the command module pilot, and Neil Armstrong, the man who will be the first to set foot on the moon, the commander, flies in the left-hand couch here. And he spends most of his time looking through a sextant and a telescope up here. You navigate in space using those instruments like this. You line up the instruments on a star, and when you've lined that up, you press the button and that information goes into the computer. And the computer then says, yes, I agree, that star is where it ought to be, therefore we're on course. It's useful that the computer can check that, because on Apollo 8, they once lined up the instruments on a blob of urine that was floating not too far away in space, and the computer said, don't be worried, we're not in the wrong place, that's not a star, that's a blob of urine.
They once lined up the instruments on a blob of urine that was floating not too far away in space, and the computer said, don't be worried, we're not in the wrong place, that's not a star, that's a blob of urine.
Don't be worried, we're not in the wrong place, that's not a star, that's a blob of urine.
This is the only part of the spacecraft that you can actually stand up in, because it leads to the docking tunnel through to the lunar module. And being able to stand up in a spacecraft really pleases most astronauts.
If you believe they put a man on the moon, man on the moon.
Good evening. Now you'll see just how difficult it is for those astronauts to get the garment off in space.
Andy Kaufman in the wrestling match. Monopoly 21, checkers and chess. Let's play Twister, let's play Risk.
And if you can do that in a spacecraft, then you've got good reason to go to the moon. Here then, the entire outer part of the spacesuit. And so the astronaut outside his spacecraft has now only one more garment underneath. This one, the liquid cooling garment, as it's called. And it answers the problem that they discovered on the Gemini flights, related to the fact that once in an extravehicular spacesuit, an astronaut can get extremely hot doing very simple tasks. This garment answers that problem. Cooling liquid is pumped in through these large tubes and then routed away through lots of very small tubes that run along next to the astronaut's skin and tacked on behind the net-like substance of this garment. And Rusty Schweikart describes the effect of this garment as being very pleasant, like stepping into a cold shower. And from there, we're left with two, understandably, very basic problems. How do they deal with their waste product? Well, liquid waste is piped away along a permanently attached tube to a metallic reservoir that's set here on the stomach. And solid waste is dealt with by these underpants, filled with a highly absorbing material and acting rather like baby's nappies. So that's it, down to the skin. And after all that performance, it doesn't surprise me that all the astronauts want to do when they get back to Earth is head straight for the bath. Fly me to the moon and let me sing a romance song. Let me one guide my arm to the moon and Mars.
Someone apparently forgot to create a burn crater underneath the lunar module's 10,000-pound thrust engine, despite the fact that during ground tests there was a real concern for the vehicle falling into the hole the engine created as it descended. Here is a Norman Rockwell depiction drawn just 2 years earlier based on the latest specifications and scientific data. In these enlargements, it looks as though the lunar module was simply placed there. Not even one speck of moon dust on the landing pod. As a result, all subsequent flights had to have the same discrepancy, which was explained away by the effect of no atmosphere. And what about stars? On the moon, with no atmosphere, they must have been quite a sight to behold. Yet there is seldom any mention of them, if ever, by any of the astronauts on any of the missions. Undoubtedly, creating a mural with all the constellations properly placed in the sky would have been virtually impossible to create accurately, much less realistically. A competent amateur astronomer would have been able to call attention to the slightest error in measurement. The answer? Not to talk about the stars. Ever. In their post-flight press conference, it was the only question to which Neil Armstrong responded with an absence of memory.
When you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
Years later, though, Michael Collins would remember seeing the elusive stars and wrote about them in Expeditions to the Moon. It seems his memory improved the older he got. Why don't stars appear in any of the photographs? Simply because the proper, mostly closed exposure setting for the camera's iris, set that way to compensate for the bright sunlight on the moon's surface, completely diminished the faintness of relatively distant specks of diminutive light. This answer is true. It does not, however, explain why they never took any pictures of the stars by themselves. The necessary mammoth amounts of air conditioning were probably responsible for the air current. Here the editor cuts to a still shot of the flag, just as the effect becomes noticeable. Here it is unchecked. This rare clip, attained decades ago, was never re-released with the inevitable increase in experience and scrutiny. Finally, the iris is opened up and you can see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window. Here is the slate for the 19th of July, and the same shot of trickery on the 19th of July. and then the 20th, and the same misleading shot on the 20th. Later that evening, they were said to be walking on the moon. How can this be when they were in Earth orbit only 9 hours earlier, and the moon is some 3 days' journey away? Furthermore, if they genuinely went to the moon, why would they be faking any part of it? Why this trickery with the window? By faking being halfway to the moon, it becomes apparent that they did so because they could not even go halfway.